Good afternoon. Welcome to the CDBG Public Service, Public Service Grant Subrecipient Training. My name is Kelly Russell. Today you're going to hear from various individuals in our department who will speak on a variety of topics. There will be a question and answer period where we will answer questions. You will be able to unmute yourself to ask your question, or you can type your question in the chat at any point. So why are we here today? I will first want to say congratulations. Your organization was selected to receive a public service grant or neighborhood economic development grant. These are federal funds from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which means they come with rules and regulations. Despite this, please know OMB-CD is here to help. So we will discuss the following topics in this presentation. What exactly is CDBG? How does this process work? What documents make up a contract? And the most important thing, how do you as an organization get paid? So what is CDBG? Well, CDBG stands for Community Development Block Grant. A block grant is a large sum of money that benefits low and moderate income residents. One of the ways the city distributes CD funding is through the Public Service and Neighborhood Economic Development grants. And as I mentioned earlier, these funds come with federal rules. So how does this work? Well, the city receives funds from the federal government. In turn, the city provides funding to organizations that serve low and moderate income individuals. These groups are called subrecipients, and that's you. And this is why the work you do is so important. So once again, thank you for all the work that you do. I thought I'm going too fast. So what's this process? There's an application process where groups apply, and the applications are reviewed by our department for eligibility. Applications are sent to City Council and the Mayor's office, who make funding decisions. Subrecipients receive award letters once the funds are legislated, and that's where the real process begins, because that's when you, the subrecipients, will begin to work with our program coordinators to create contracts. As subrecipients, you'll carry out program activities and submit invoices. And eventually, I shouldn't say eventually, excuse me, but once the invoice is submitted, shortly thereafter, the city controller's office will issue a check for the invoice amount. Please remember, CDBG is a reimbursement grant, meaning you have to spend the money to get the money. But the main reason why we're here today is to talk about you, the subrecipients, working with our program coordinators to create contracts. At this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to our program supervisor, Joshua Rollo. Josh?
Thanks, Kelly. So we're going to talk about building that contract, but first, let's talk about some eligibility requirements that your organization must maintain throughout the contract term. So basically from now through the end of 2025. So your organization must have the must maintain these bulleted items below. So having a UEI and active SAM.gov registration, having your general liability insurance and your workers' comp insurance if you have paid employees, if you have staff, and then maintaining your 501c3 status. All organizations must maintain that 501c3 status throughout the term of their contract. I'm going to go into a little bit more the UEI, SAM.gov, and insurance requirements as we talk about the different aspects of the contract. And you know, the reason why you must maintain all of these, there's sort of like different federal requirements and city requirements that mean that you have to keep those. But if you are found to not have any of these items through the length of your contract, we may withhold payment, or your contract may not be able to be completed. So just please make sure you're staying on top of these items. Okay, so now I'm going to go through the particular attachments and documents that your coordinator will need from you to create a subrecipient agreement. So this contract this contract will be assembled and then sent to you for signature via email. You should have gotten an award letter from, or most of you have received an award letter from your coordinator, the contact from our office, which references all of the, which has a checklist in it where it references all of the items, attachments that we need to build your contract. On the left-hand side of the screen here, you'll see a list of attachments. We're going to go through each of these and talk about exactly what we're looking for so that we can assemble that contract. So going into the first exhibit, first part here is your scope. This is describing how your funds will be spent. It's really kind of the heart of the contract in terms of, what you're actually going to be doing. There may be particular items that you're going to need to include in that scope. We have a bulleted list here for different requirements for presumed benefit populations, if you need to verify your client income, if you need to verify what census tracts you're serving. Those will all come from the checklist and your coordinator, so you'll know exactly which one of these items you'll need to include in your scope. One thing that I'm going to highlight that's new for our NED grantee recipients, that's the Neighborhood Economic Development Grant. We have a new beneficiary form that you'll have to complete this year, but along with that, we're asking for you to include in the scope some different metrics that we asked from you during the application phase. So those were how many businesses are you serving, vacant properties that were returned to productive use, affordable housing created, and or residents engaged during your contract term. Next is the budget, or Exhibit B. So all of these, so this is where you list all of your expenses, exactly how you're going to spend that grant. It must be tied to your scope. We're going to go, or in the second half of this presentation, we're going to go a little bit more into detail on this budget and of allowable expenses, but you want to make sure that you're having only provable expenses in there, and the total of this grant, the total of this budget will be for your grant. So this isn't for your program overall, it's just for how you plan to spend this grant particularly. And yeah, like I said, we'll be going more into that in the second half of this presentation. Exhibit C is insurance. This is one of those items that you're going to have to maintain throughout the entire term of the contract. We're going to be checking that you have current insurance at the beginning when we're executing the contract. So I'm going to start with general liability insurance. Your organization must have $1 million in general liability insurance. We need to see a certificate of insurance that proves that. On that certificate of insurance, it must say the City of Pittsburgh is an additional insured in terms of general liability insurance. In some cases, your organization, if you have kind of expenses or kind of program activities that involve driving cars around, we may also ask for auto insurance coverage as well. And then, like I said, city requires proof of insurance for entire contract term. We are looking more closely at when insurance expires. And so if your insurance coverage expires kind of in the middle of your contract term, please be sure to send that updated insurance certificate to us immediately. Otherwise, our law department will be reaching out to you to ask for an updated certificate. The second part of Exhibit C is your workers' comp insurance. That's a requirement that the city has for all organizations that have paid staff. So we're going to need to see proof of workers' comp insurance similar to the general liability insurance. That's a certificate or an accord form. If your organization does not have any paid staff, if you're all volunteer or you only have independent contractors, You will not need to show proof of workers' comp insurance, but we will ask for you to sign a waiver saying that you do not have any paid staff and that you're sort of waiving the requirement or asking for us to waive the requirement for workers' comp insurance. Sometimes people get a little confused about the wording here, employees or independent contractors. A nice tip to think of is if you or the people you are paying, if you're withholding their income tax or Social Security, a payment for the payment to employees, then they are employees, then they are paid staff, as we'd say. If you have sort of a contract with somebody and you're paying them and not withholding any of those taxes, they're probably independent contractors. So be sure you understand the differences for that. Next is Exhibit D. That is something that you haven't received in your packet, you haven't received from us in an email. It's just a debarment certificate saying that you're not barred from working with the city of Pittsburgh. That will be signed electronically along with the emailed version of your contract. Next is Exhibit E. That's the statement of affiliations. That will be a form that you received from us. We are encouraging brief answers as you complete that. I think it's a 4-question form. The most important part of that is the board of directors list at the bottom. Basically, question 4 is asking for a list of your board of directors. If that list is too long for the space that we provided in the form, please, or you're able to say see attach for that 4th question and just attach a list of that board of directors. Next is the reporting form, the grant reporting form. This form should have been sent by your coordinator as well. It's a form where you list all of the federal funds that you've spent in your past fiscal year. When you're completing this, make sure to include any other CDBG funds from the city. So that would be public service grants, neighborhood economic development grants, as well as neighborhood employment center grants. Yes, I think that's everything for that one. Here is a new requirement that we're asking from all of our subrecipients this year. So we need to see proof that your organization has SAM.gov registration. SAM.gov is a requirement from HUD that's been around for the past couple years. It replaced the DUNS number, if you all are familiar with that. And we need to see proof of this registration as a PDF that you'll download from SAM.gov. So this registration is a 2-part process. We've noticed that organizations in the past have just had their UEI, or unique entity ID. But then not have the full SAM.gov registration, you are required to have both, and we have resources available so that you understand how to do that full registration. If you have any questions along the way, you can always talk to your coordinator for more information, and we can do our best to help you. Although we don't manage SAM.gov, it's external, so we can only sort of help you along the way. Like the insurance, this is a registration that you must maintain current throughout the term of the contract. These need to be renewed every single year, and it's, from what I understand, it's a fairly easy renewal process. There are instructions in the contract checklist on how to download this PDF from SAM.gov. So look to that and to your coordinator for more information. Next, here's just a kind of a little sample or kind of the first half of the document that we'd be looking for. This is redacted, but at the top of the document, right under sam.gov, that would be where your organization's name would be. And then highlighted on the screen is active registration under registration status. So we'll be looking for that to be an active registration so that we know that you're current on everything. This will be a 2-page document. You're just seeing like the first half of it right now. Okay, and then the last thing that we're going to need from you will be the contact information of your signer. We'll need to have their name, title, and email address. We'll be using the email address you provide to send them the DocuSign signature or send them the DocuSign agreement. So please be sure that there's no typos or anything in that email address. We've had issues in the past where we've sent things to an organization, there's been a typo, and so things get bounced back and it just delays the signature process. And this is just a person that is authorized to sign on behalf of your organization. So we've gone through all of the documents or all of the items that we need to create your contract. We just want to take a couple moments to sort of emphasize why this contract does matter. This is a legally binding contract, and it's the rules for how your grant, it's sort of the rules for how your grant is managed and should be viewed from your perspective. There are information in there like the contract term limits. So how we've been talking about all of your expenses need to be completed between January 1st, 2025 to December 31st, 2025. That's all in the contract, as well as sort of all of the other rules that we talked about on maintaining your sam.gov registration and maintaining insurance and things like that. So when that contract is executed, make sure you save that and review it to make sure you understand the different aspects of it. Finally, we are asking for all of our subrecipients to submit the items in that contract checklist by December 13th. We want to make sure that the coordinators have the documents they need in time to assemble this contract and get everything set up or prepared to get you all started for January 1st. Once they assemble all those documents after December 13th and put it, you'll eventually see it come through DocuSign, although it may take a little while as we're processing everything out at once. That is everything I had. I am now going to pass it over to AJ Stevens, who's going to talk about monitoring.
Hi there, I'm AJ Stevens. I'm a program coordinator here, and I'm going to start with a quote from HUD, which you can see, the cardinal rule of federal funds is, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. And of course, if something didn't happen, you can't get paid for it. So document everything. We want all of our subrecipients to have a dedicated file for this grant, so that will include all of the documents your program coordinator sends to you and everything you send to them, as well as all of your records of your beneficiaries, basically the proof that you're doing the work, the proof that you're spending the money, all needs to be in one easily accessible place. And these documents must be kept for 5 years after your final payment. That's not 5 years after your award, that's 5 years after you receive the final check from the city. And why are we documenting all of this? Because every organization that receives funds is subject to, very scary word coming up, monitoring. And this freaks a lot of people out, but it's not designed to trip you up. You will be warned well in advance, and your program coordinator will work really hard with you to make sure that all of your files are in order and you know what's coming. Monitoring is done on a predetermined basis. We essentially randomly select out of our groups, every so often, just to check that all of their files are on the up and up, because periodically HUD will come to the city and they will randomly select groups. So this is more like preventative care to ensure that when HUD comes looking, they don't find anything. And if you're still a little freaked out, just remember, we want you to pass the monitoring. So we're going to take questions now. If you like, you can type them in the chat. Otherwise, you can raise your hand and we will allow you to unmute yourself.
I see a hand up from Jack. I am going to allow you to unmute yourself. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question. There should be a mic somewhere, maybe at the top of your screen, where you can unmute yourself, Jack, because we can't hear you right now.
Okay, hey, thank you very much. Two questions, actually. One is, how long does it typically take to get reimbursed when you turn in an invoice?
That depends if you've turned everything in correctly, but if your invoice is all ship shape, then your coordinator will review it. The timeline on that varies depending on how much workload we have, but we try to have a pretty quick turnaround, and then we pass it to fiscal.
Yeah, and upon everything being completed and submitted for payment, usually 7 to 10 days at the most.
Okay, that sounds great. If I might throw another question out to you real quickly. As I walked through the package, there was a bit of discussion about verifying low income or extremely low income, that kind of thing. Our client base, those that we're targeting, are in the jail. So typically they have zero income at the time. So I'm wondering if there's any applicability here. Do I need to be checking any documents on their income level?
Because
that's not a presumed benefit, right?
No.
Likely what you're going to be doing is recording them all as extremely low income, but having some sort of proof that they are incarcerated. You're gonna have to email your program coordinator that, so that we can bring that up to our HUD field rep, because we're gonna need some further guidance on that.
Okay, very good. I will bounce that off at Eva. Thank you.
Thanks.
We have another question. Holly Benson, I was told the deadline for turning in documents was December 20th. Is it now the 13th? If your coordinator gave you a different date, then follow the one that they provided you. I think we're trying to make sure that for the majority of cases, it should be December 13th. But yeah, maybe there's some sort of particular instance with your coordinator where they've sort of structured their workload slightly differently. So if you've heard directly from Holly, if you've heard directly from your coordinator, do December 20th. And then Michael asks, as far as the income qualifications for our members, can this go by school district? We're a youth baseball organization. So there are resources available. So if Pittsburgh Public Schools, we do send subrecipients, and there's a contract your coordinator can give you to the person who handles free and reduced, or who has the list of free reduced lunch eligible students. And so what subrecipients do is they'll cross-reference the youth that are in their program with the list that, or I guess the school district actually cross-references, and they'll let you know which one of your youth are eligible for free and reduced lunch and are income eligible. So you can work with your coordinator to get that contact information and get that verified.
And that goes for any youth organization. If you're serving kids that attend Pittsburgh Public Schools, that's the most common way for income verification. Anybody else? Don't see any hands, don't see any typing, so I will pass it over to Michael Knight for money time.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Michael Knight, Fiscal and Contracting Supervisor for Community Development Team. You've heard a lot of information as far as what it takes to construct your contract to get it pretty much set up to be reimbursed for you. Now it's time to understand what you need to do to actually be reimbursed and get your money. So first things first, going back to Exhibit B, which you heard earlier about creating a budget. When creating a budget, we want you to be vague in your descriptions. And I have some examples in the next slide, what I mean. Just to kind of give a short insight to this is if you're looking to be reimbursed for like personnel time, we don't need to see, the budget line items broken up by job position. So you don't need the janitor, you don't need the executive director, secretary, just one line item that says personnel that can encompass one or many individuals. Same goes with supplies. We don't need to have it broken down by locations that you shop at, just supplies. That way you can utilize that one line item for multiples. So with that being said, we want to look at what can get approved. So it's almost like what's eligible. And a lot of the common things that we've approved and a lot of groups used over the past years, as you can see on the list, I'm not going to go through them all, but things such as personnel, again, paying for staff time who are working directly on the program that you applied for. Utilities is another one, sports equipment, and the list can go on. These are some of the common eligible line items that we've approved over the last years. When thinking about your line items too with your budget, there's a thing called procurement. And whenever you think about procurement, think about if you're buying or if you're obtaining professional service of an individual, anything over $5,000 worth of expenditures will trigger a procurement process that your group should have followed in order to acquire those services. With that being said, you should have a procurement policy. If this is something new to you or you're not exactly sure, please don't hesitate to reach out to your coordinator. We can help you navigate through this. But if you do have a policy, we would like you to follow it when outsourcing things such as professional service or high supply expense items for your program. So again, if you ever have any questions regarding this, please reach out to your coordinators as we can provide further details and guidance. Now, we looked at some eligible items in the past, or a couple slides ago. Now let's look at some things that are ineligible. Before I dive into the ineligibles, I want to say one thing and make it clear. You all as organization leaders or staff members, you are eligible to buy and spend your money however you like, but in the eyes of HUD, there are certain things that are reimbursable and non-reimbursable as far as benefiting the target audience that you serve. So with that being said, some of the ineligible expenses that we commonly see requested would be events, so banquets, award ceremonies, Christmas parties, Halloween parties, something of that nature. Great idea, continue to do them, but they're not eligible for reimbursement under this program. If you're looking for, If you're looking for, stipends for college and high school kids, it would not be deemed a reimbursable expense. Now, if they're providing you some contractual service agreement, if there's a contractual service agreement between you and those individuals, then that is reimbursable. And again, that would be more so as a professional service or contracting agreement. Food, drinks, and snacks. Again, great incentives, great things for different programs, but if your organization's primary focus is not a food bank or a food provider, then this would be deemed ineligible for reimbursement. And the list goes on, but just to point out a few items on there. If you have questions, as always, reach out to your coordinator and they can provide further guidance. Now, once we've determined eligible budget items and everything, how do we get paid? So it's quite simple. There is an invoicing process that you as the organization will need to submit to your program coordinator, and you can begin invoicing for reimbursement as soon as your contract is executed. You will receive a digital copy of your executed contract via email from your coordinator. So once you get that, you can start invoicing immediately. Upon receiving your executed contract, you will also receive a checklist, just pretty much showing you what you will need to follow in order to properly submit a requisition for reimbursement. Please understand that the expenses that you incur must fall within the term of your contract in order to be reimbursed. Anything outside the contract terms will not be reimbursed, and we'll talk about some examples shortly. At the end of the day, you were awarded these funds. We want to see you expend all the funds. We don't want to have to take it away. We don't want groups to feel like they're running into problems. Please communicate, and we can find ways for you to expend all your funds if your budget needs to be tailored or altered in any way. So, as far as submitting a requisition for reimbursement, again, like I said, you'll receive this information when your contract's executed, but just to touch base, you'll receive a requisition form, which we'll go over on the next slide. This form is what you will use to ask for reimbursement. This is where you let us know how much you're asking to be reimbursed per your budgeted line items. Along with this requisition will be a narrative explaining what these funds were able to do for your program, who the number of people they helped, or just give some type of insight as to what these funds were able to do for your program. Next, along with the requisition, you will need to provide proof of expenditures. If you have personnel as a line item, you want to be reimbursed $1,000 for personnel, you need backup. Without the backup, we cannot reimburse you for any expenses. Last but not least would be the beneficiary form, which just kind of breaks down the data of individuals served. There's some categories that you would need to fill in and submit that to. This beneficiary form this year will be required for NED recipients, as HUD has now requested to see more details as to how the NED funding has impacted or benefited people in your communities. One last thing to touch base on before we move to the next slide is coming soon in 2025, there will be a new invoice submission date software that we'll be using. Each organization will be able to submit all their documents into this software. They'll be able to track the process as to where it's at as far as the review process and the payment process, and when the check gets cut to your organization, you're able to see when that payment was made. So it's just creating a little bit more transparency and a systematic approach so that everyone's doing the process the same way, opposed to, some groups submitting invoices via paper, some submitting it via fax or email. Now it's just, it'll be one streamlined database where everyone has access. Our team, everyone will have access to it to ensure that no one's information is getting lost in the transaction anywhere, and you all are able to monitor and see where everything is. All right, next, here's a copy of a requisition form, which this is a digital form that you'll receive. And just to kind of go over it, some of you are familiar with this form, just some areas of importance that we will need to make sure you follow. The first column under cost category, this will be where you list the budgeted line items that were approved in your contract. So whatever you have in your contract exhibit B will go into that column, along with the budget section will match up with those line items. There is a world where you can shift around funds, but you can't just do it on your own. You must do a budget mod if you need to move funds from one line item to another line item. A program coordinator can assist you with that, but that is doable. The most important part of this requisition is making sure you fill out the amount requested column. If you do not put any dollar amount in that column, we will assume you are not asking to be reimbursed for anything. Even if you send us backup documentation, it is not the program coordinator's job to assume how much you are asking to be reimbursed. So that column is very important that you identify how much you're asking to be reimbursed. Upon entering the dollar amounts into that columns, the amount remaining in the year-to-date columns will auto-populate due to formulas set up to let you know how much you expended year-to-date and then how much is remaining in those budgeted line items. Sorry, had to take a breather. So upon submitting that requisition cover sheet, depending on what your budgeted line items are, here's some acceptable documentation that we will be looking for in order to approve your request and move it forward for payment. So if you have personnel, timesheets are a must. We've heard it numerous times, and I'll just address it. If you're a salary employee, by all means, good. But if you want to be reimbursed, a timesheet must be filled out for the purpose of our funding. If you do not fill out a timesheet, you will not be reimbursed. But timesheets must be filled out. They must have two signatures, an employee signature and a supervisor signature. There are some cases where we reimburse for executive directors. Your timesheets must be signed and or approved by a board member. Along with the submission of timesheets, we need a copy of a payroll detail report showing that individual was paid with the date range of that payroll, or a copy of the pay stub to, again, provide proof of payment to whoever the individual or individuals are. So again, any questions with personnel, documentation, or any of this stuff, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm going to go over just a couple more just to provide some clarity. Utilities, as we spoke about before, expenses can only be reimbursed within the term of your contractual agreement with the city. And what I mean by that, utilities, a lot of your contracts are going to start January 1st of 2025. And if you're asking to be reimbursed for your electric bill and you receive that January bill, 9 times out of 10, that the term of service for that bill will have December a part of it. So if you're asking to be reimbursed in full, your full January bill and the term of service goes from December 14th through January 10th, that bill will be accepted, but not at the full amount. It will have to be prorated to adjust for just 10 days of service. So please just keep that in mind whenever you're submitting for like utility bills, water bill, electric bill, gas bill, of that nature. We need to see the full complete bill so we can see, make sure there's no late fees. If there's a previous balance on a bill, it's okay. Only thing is, we're only paying for the current charges. So if your current charge is $100, but the bill total is $500, we're only reimbursing $100. Any prior bills or prior balances, you must submit the actual invoice as long as it falls within the term of your contract. Rent. If you're asking to be reimbursed for rent, we do need to see a current lease agreement or rental agreement that covers the term of your contract or falls within the date range of your contract. Along with that agreement, we need to see either a cash deposited check or some type of invoice from the landlord or a receipt showing proof of payment was made to be eligible. Last thing I'm gonna cover is just supplies. Whenever you're doing your shopping, please make sure you keep receipts. Now there's a world where receipts can get damaged, start to fade. We'll just make this very clear. If you have any trouble seeing the items on there, we cannot see the items on there. We must see itemized receipts or itemized invoices showing what was purchased with these funds. If there's any fading, any pencil or pen, if you end up writing on there with a pencil or pen to try to clean it up, that will be deemed ineligible and we won't be able to reimburse for that. So again, with receipts, we need to know who the receipt was from, what was the date of the purchase, what the items were, and the amounts. And they must be legible and not edited in any form or fashion. All right, well, with that being said, again, you all been a wonderful audience, but before we let you go, there's one thing that you have to do to ensure that you will qualify for funding, and that is you have to pass the test. So at this time, I'm gonna pass it over to Nathan, who is going to provide you the test today.
Hello, my name is Nathan Graham, and I'm a program coordinator here at the City of Pittsburgh. I see some of my groups in here today, so I'm very thankful that you showed up and you're listening to this conversation that we're having. So we're going to go over a few quiz questions on what is an eligible expense. So the first one is, are canned goods for a food pantry an eligible expense? In the chat, please, so it looks more lively, say yes or no, depending on what you believe the answer to be. Perfect. So yes, canned goods for a food pantry are acceptable. The program itself is a food pantry, and so the canned goods are going towards your program. And as long as you have a proof of receipt, we can reimburse for that. And the receipt can be from many different sources: Giant Eagle, Aldi's, Costco, wherever those canned goods from. As long as you have a receipt, it would be an eligible expense. So for our next question, would lunch for volunteers at a community cleanup be an eligible expense? I see a lot of no's, and that's perfect because the answer is no. The program itself is a community cleanup, and lunch HUD determines is not an actual eligible expense, but this can also extend to different programs. If you're running a youth program, maybe like a youth after school program or a preschool or something of that nature, providing lunch or providing food for those programs would also be an ineligible expense. Food is one that trips people up a lot, and it really needs to be a central part of your program for it to be an eligible expense, such as a food pantry or something of that nature. All right, third question, would salary and benefits be an eligible expense? See a lot of yeses, and the answer is yes. Personnel costs are a great way to spend this fund. I know private foundations sometimes don't allow to use personnel costs for their grants. And so this is a way that CDBG grants can be used. The number one thing that people trip up on are timesheets. I know Michael just went over it, but if you are planning on using personnel costs for this grant, please remember to do your timesheets. No one likes to do them retroactively, so please be on top of that. Make sure you have 2 signatures, CDBG versus non-CDBG hours, and make sure you submit that along with your payroll details. The fourth question is a new computer for your office staff an eligible expense? I see some yeses, some nos. So this is a very tricky question. The answer is no, because it's a new computer for your office staff. Office staff being the most important part of this question. Technology itself can be a very tricky budget line item, and I would suggest if you want to purchase new technology to talk to your program coordinator to talk about it and see if it would be allowed. In some cases it can, but it needs to have caveats to it and it needs to be in the right circumstances. But if you're buying a new computer for your office staff, it wouldn't necessarily be covered. And the fifth question, would insurance for your organization be an eligible expense? The answer is yes. Insurance is also a pretty traditional line item that a lot of organizations have used their CDBG funds for. Just make sure that you show your policy when you are submitting your documentation. Sometimes your policy runs half in, half out of your program term date. If that is the case, then we might prorate it, but then we can prorate it again once your policy goes into the next year. So it can be covered. We just might have to reimburse you twice, or you need to have 2 checks, but we need to see your policy. But this is a great way to spend your CDBG dollars. And the last question, what is the date by which you should submit your contract documents? Perfect, yes. Unless you're Holly. Everyone else, unfortunately, maybe you don't have as nice of a program coordinator as Holly does, but it is December 13th. Now, you can always submit your program documents to us before December 13th, and we will love you for it. That way we can get you set up faster and get your contracts prepared at an earlier date. But please try to get everything into your program coordinator before December 13th. Because naturally after December 13th, it's almost the holidays and no one really wants to work a week before Christmas. So try to get your documents into us, and that way we can be prepared for the new year. And if you have any questions or if you're confused on anything, I see a hand raised, and there were some questions about technology. That one's always a tricky question. So if you have any specific questions or you have anything you want to ask, now is the time. Put it in the chat. You can raise your hand.
I see Kahara has his hand up. If you want to unmute yourself now and ask your question. At least I think I've allowed you.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. So it should be at the top of your screen, there should be a mic with maybe an X through it right now. If you could hit that and unmute yourself. Also, if you're having trouble with that, you can put your question in the chat as well.
In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and clarify a little bit on technology. The big thing is if we can justify that it is going to be used by the beneficiaries and be integral to your program. So if you think that you have an eligible technology expense, ask your program coordinator. And that goes for anything. If you think you have an eligible expense to put in your budget, ask your coordinator. That's what we're here for.
So, Kara, I don't know if you're speaking right now, but you still have you muted, and we don't see anything in the chat. But if anybody else has any other questions, you can raise your hand or submit something through the chat. Oh, I raised my hand.
Josh, do you have a question?
Okay.
How many people are ready to spin?
Oh,
It's the boss on it, you know.
yeah, I thought.
Josh is. Oh.
Okay. Okay.
Everything all right?
So we have a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah asks, I may have missed this. Is there a specific timesheet format you require? So we do have a template that we can share with you, which is like definitely acceptable. But I can turn over to Mike on everything we would need in a timesheet.
Yes, so, in regards to timesheets, we want to make sure it has it accounts for the daily activity. If the person who is being reimbursed for their time, if they're not 100% spending their time on the CDBG program requested, then we need a separate column showing how many hours per day were spent on the CDBG program. Everyone has different variations of timesheets, so not necessarily a format, but just details that we need to see. Daily timesheet, how many hours were worked that day, whether it's started at 8, left at 4, and then if they're not 100%, it's another column showing how many CDBG hours or grant hours were spent per day on that program, along with 2 signatures.
We do have a template timesheet, so if you are one of those salaried employees that needs to start keeping a timesheet, ask your coordinator for it. We have that template to make it easier.
We have 5 minutes left. Are there any other questions? And Kahara, if you want to email your coordinator, maybe your question, if you're having trouble talking to us right now. Yeah, either by unmuting yourself or putting your question in the chat. Not seeing any questions. Maybe we want to go to the... So here are some further resources. We will be sending out this slideshow to all of the attendees, but your number one resource throughout this process is your program coordinator. You heard that a lot throughout the presentation. They are your number one resource for accessing anybody else in our office and anything that has to do with your grant. Also, you have your contract checklist that tells you specifically everything you need to build out that contract, all those documents I went over. There's a couple more resources that are directly from HUD, which is where your CDBG funds are coming from. Playing by the rules for subrecipients is kind of a larger PDF that talks about all the different requirements for subrecipients. We kind of just focus in on the things that are most pertinent for these funds or for these programs. There's also the HUD Exchange, which talks about subrecipients and even, the requirements that, all these organizations need to have for all of the HUD grants. So that's a lot of information. And finally, we have the resources for subrecipients page on the OMB Community Development page or website. So the city website has recently updated, if you haven't seen, and there are, I believe all the links have changed. So if you have any bookmarks or any links that you've used in the past, likely they won't work anymore. This is the updated link on your screen here, but you'll be receiving these slides too, and you'll be able to use the hyperlink. Okay, and I see a question from Holly. This is the first time I'm managing this grant. Oh, right. You're welcome for the overview. Can we have slides sent to us as reference? Yes. Okay. Yeah, we'll send that out. And it'll be available on the subrecipient page as well. All right. Well, not seeing any more questions here. I'll pass it over to Kelly to conclude us.
Well, I want to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy days for for joining us. As it's already been stated, if you have any questions, please follow up with your program coordinators. We thank you for all your time and opportunity today. And once again, congratulations on receiving a public service grant or neighborhood economic development grant. And thank you. Thank you once again. And happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and all that other good stuff to everybody too.
We did get another question.
So if we use the funding for W-2 employees, do we need to submit a monthly report of CDBG related activities? So if you're using the funds for salary, you'll need to provide timesheets and proof of payment through payroll or pay stubs.
And you'll need to put a narrative with that. It doesn't have to be monthly, like depending on if you are sending an invoice after 3 months, it can be one narrative that describes those 3 months.
But we do need to report CDBG versus non-CDBG. So, and also on your timesheet, there needs to be a column for CDBG versus non-CDBG hours. We don't need a report saying, what they did in those CDBG hours outside of your narrative, but you do need to report if they work 8 hours of a day, but they were only working 4 hours on your CDBG project, then report 4 hours on the timesheet versus 4 hours that they were not working on the CDBG project. Maybe they were doing something else or managing a different project that's not being funded by CDBG. So just keep that in mind too when you're dealing with your timesheets.
You're welcome, Howard. All right. See you, everybody.
All right. Take care again, everyone.